Hello, friends. Did you know that there is something called apophenia, and that if we're not aware of it, that it can have a significant impact on our life? Well, today I'm going to talk about this aspect of our minds and relate it to tracking, situational awareness, and a whole lot more. But first, Mirabelle has gotten as into the whip as I have, and so she wanted to show off some of her recent target practice. All right, friends. You know that rewilding, the way that I interpret it at least, has a lot to do with being aware of our mind's activity. I hypothesize that our ancestors may have been more aware of their mental activity than we are. We today live in an age of so much distraction, and we are so removed from the everyday aspects of life, gathering our food, going to the bathroom. We tend to distract ourselves through all of these activities, eating our food, having sex. How many of us are where we are? And I think that our ancestors probably did just from something like, well, if you've ever been in a sit spot, if you've ever been a hunter, if you've done Shinrin Yoku, you find that nature kind of automatically starts to get our mind more into a state of open awareness. In a state of open awareness, we're more aware of what our mind is doing. Now, when we're not aware of our mind's activity, then essentially our mind is running on autopilot. And because our mind has so much to do with our decisions, our preferences, our actions, the way we speak, basically what we do with every moment of our life, if we aren't at least aware of that, and hopefully a little bit in control of what our mind is doing, then, geez, we're basically at the mercy of cultural whims, of a culture that is all too happy to forge us into just a consumer, or into a person that is very fear-based and is going to be latching on to different ideas that guide our minds into being followers. Now, apophenia is I think, a pretty useful word, and it can apply to a broad range of mental activity. And this is the part of our brain that has to do with pattern recognition. Pattern recognition is exceedingly important for us to function in life. And I'll start off with the idea of tracking. In a short time, someone can take somebody out into the woods who's never had any tracking experience and can teach them to see some patterns. And these patterns can be disturbances that show the passage of, say, a scuffling human foot. Without the ability to recognize these patterns, we wouldn't be able to track. We wouldn't be able to recognize the placement of a gait pattern. We wouldn't be able to recognize even a canid track from a felid track from a deer track, because we wouldn't be able to recognize patterns. To be able to see these patterns is a basic functioning of our mind, but it also can become very subtle. So in tracking, I'm going to start out and I'm going to see, okay, I can kind of make out where something went. But as I develop more ability to recognize patterns, I might be able to tell, well, a lot more things, get a higher range of detail out of that same disturbance in the ground, because I'm going to recognize patterns that, for instance, tell me how far apart these hooves or feet or paws were being placed. And then I might be able to even identify an animal, or at least come pretty close, based on recognizing that pattern alone. When we're out in the woods, our mind, well, all the time, our mind is very, very good at picking out the human silhouette. It's a pattern that we are conditioned to recognize. It's a good thing because then we can recognize other humans in the woods, for instance. However, as soon as that human lays down so that they are partially obscured behind a log and just their head is showing to us, we lose that ability. In other words, the pattern recognition can be a very good thing because as I scan, oh, look, there's a person in the woods. But it can also be sort of a double-edged sword because if I scan through the woods expecting to see that pattern, I'm not going to be using really any of my perception for looking for just the round face pattern in the woods. And I'm going to tend to miss a lot. So when my mind uses pattern recognition, good. When my mind gets locked into pattern recognition, especially a specific pattern, and forgets to be openly aware of other things, then that's not so good. Now, apophenia is the tendency for us to look out and see patterns and then attribute meaning to them that isn't there. So it's a tendency of our mind to really want to attribute meaning to things. And a classic example is I can look up and I can see a cloud that looks like a dog, I think. And I can see that A as just a random pattern. I can B, see it as, wow, look, nature has taken on a form and my mind has put a pattern recognition and a meaning onto it. And C, I can get trapped into that meaning because I've been thinking about whether I should get a dog or not. And then I look up at that cloud. Because I'm really thinking about dogs, I may think that really looks like a dog and it must mean that I'm supposed to get the dog. And this gets tricksy because a lot of us in our spiritual explorations, if we are exploring, let's say, intention manifestation or shamanism, or we are just getting out more into nature and being kind of open to the spiritual signs, one might say, that might occur out there. There's maybe some magic in the world that we want to pay attention to. When I'm wondering if this is a good place to build my camp, and I really love eagles, and an eagle flies over, I love chickadees, and a chickadee comes really close and lands, then there may be nothing wrong with taking that as a good sign, especially if I've looked at the camp and I've already checked it out and said, hey, this looks like a great camp. Now, this can get us into trouble though. If I've looked at this camp and I've seen all kinds of dead trees above, and I know there's a storm coming, and I think, gosh, this looks like I might get crushed by a dead tree tonight. And then the chickadee comes and I say, okay, the chickadee has said yes, but I'm not being aware of other aspects of the situation. See, this is the difference between observing patterns and recognizing them and being curious about them and letting those patterns kind of take over our mind and sometimes make us, well, really encourage us to make not so great decisions. Now, I'm going to show you an example here in the woods of some apophenia, and we can see it kind of unfold. There's this really pretty burl in the tree there. And look, there's a little kind of compartment. And what's in there? Wow, look at that. Do you recognize it? Okay. Now do you recognize it? Now, you might see that and know me you maybe watch the channel long enough to know that I have a fair amount of interest in Zen Buddhism, and think, cool, Ketan climbed up that tree and placed a little Buddha figurine up in that tree. Kind of cool. It's a perfect little nook for it. And watch. My mind sees that. It starts putting together some links. Okay, there's the Buddha, clearly a little Buddha statue. And Ketan is into Buddhism, so probably he put that there, and he's showing us in the video. Maybe he wants to show off his tree climbing skills. So I've come together and I've created a story. And then that's what I believe. So I'm close to the possibility that when we moved here, somebody else may have placed that little Buddha figurine there. And I'm even further close to what's actually happening over there, which is that that is a growth in the wood. That is not actually a Buddha figurine that anybody put there, except for the tree itself, nature herself. It's just a growth in the wood. And so there is a perfect example of how our mind can see something, it recognizes a pattern, it attributes a meaning, it builds stories around it. And pretty soon I've created a reality for myself that often can be completely divorced from the actual reality if I would look a little bit deeper. Now, we're all familiar with how this works on the internet. So it is very easy to look at any kind of I could look at a dictionary, I could look at a textbook and start to look for patterns in the letters, in the numbers, and I can come up with pretty much anything. This is how a lot of prophecies come to be. A lot of predictions, a lot of theories about the world come to be because I'm looking at the patterns and I want to find something. This is an important part of this. I want to find something, and when I want to find something, I pretty much will find it. Now, on the internet, this gets really tricksy because there are some very smart people who know that our minds work like this and are all too happy to create patterns for us, to lay out a pathway of patterns that they know will follow. Some people will follow. And then they'll start to get followers. They'll get people who believe whatever theory, whatever pattern they're trying to lay out. And thus we can very easily fall prey to adopting somebody else's thought forms as our own. Now, in tracking, if I'm not aware of this, I'm going to fall into one of the biggest traps of tracking, which is I'm going to look at a pattern. I'm going to, again, here it is, I'm going to want to believe that this is a raccoon that's going down to the stream and then is walking over towards that birch tree. And even though the tracks may be pretty poor, I'm going to start to see the patterns I want to see, and I may decide that that is a raccoon and that has followed exactly what I said. And I might be pretty embarrassed when a more advanced tracker comes along and says, well, actually look more carefully. That wasn't a raccoon. This is actually two animals. This is two possum, and they came down here. And if you look underneath this, you can see there's a distinct track. You see where I'm going. So the mind's tendency to want to see something can be one of our biggest enemies in a way. That desire for the pattern to tell us what we want it to tell us is what creates that apophenia, that tendency for us to perceive and then latch onto some pattern and make it our own. In situational awareness, I can do the same thing. I can look and I can have, let's say I read an article last week about kind of some white supremacist group, and I saw that they were using the Mjolnir as one of their symbols. And then I look and I see, whoa, Ketan's got a Mjolnir on. He must be a white supremacist. Or you might look and go, oh, that's an upside down cross. Kenton must be a Satanist. I could just as easily look and say, oh, look, that seems to be handmade metal. I wonder if that guy does metalworking. I'm going to look more carefully and see ruins in there and say, oh, those are Norse ruins. I wonder if he practices Wicca or something. So 4 different mindsets, 4 different desires to see a certain thing or areas of expertise. And I can look at that person and I can make different judgments about them. But here's the really important thing to recognize about this and how it can affect our mind, is that if we desire to see a certain pattern, if we are really good at something and we tend to see certain patterns, then I'm going to have a skewed view of the world. I'm going to perceive things that may not have a true reflection upon reality if we look more carefully. And this goes up against that part of my mind that dwells in curiosity. So the other thing I could do is I could see that Mjolnir and I could say, wow, what's that about? Tell me what that's about. I have no idea. And that person may be willing to share with you, and you might learn a little bit more. Maybe they're not even telling the truth. But that's just pointing to how much of the world is hidden from our minds. With curiosity, we stay always open to the world. We don't get locked down into judging a person, judging a situation, making a lot of assumptions, latching on to other people's ideas. With curiosity, we keep looking around us and saying, what is that? Now when I see a pattern, I can look at it and I can say, okay, here's what my mind wants to make that into. This is mindfulness. Mindfulness of our mind's activity, awareness of our mind's activity. Noticing that I have a desire for that pattern to look like something. And that should be a warning flag to me. If I desire it to look like something, then I know that my mind is going to be apt to apply a meaning to it. Maybe see patterns that aren't even there. And then I can be ruled by it. If I'm aware of that, I look and I say, oh my gosh, yeah, I really want to believe in this. And there's the pattern I'm seeing. Be aware, Kenton, because your mind is going to want to apply your desire onto that pattern. But really look at that pattern carefully. And when we can separate out our desire and replace it with just curiosity, then we're going to have a higher degree of awareness of our world. And we're going to have a higher degree of awareness of our mind's activity. This is the entrance to not being ruled, essentially, by this apophenia, by this tendency of our mind to want, oh, how desperately it wants. It really wants meaning to go on to everything. So, my friends, this was just a little exploration of our mind's tendency to engage in this activity and a call to awareness, to remember these important points, that if I have a desire to see something, to see a pattern, I'm probably going to find that pattern. And if we can separate out our desire and instead apply curiosity, then we can still be aware of patterns, but not get trapped by them. Share with me if you have experienced this in your own life, if there are times you've gotten trapped into seeing something that wasn't really there, and how you became more aware of that process in your mind. All right, my friends, love to you all. Can't wait to talk with you in the comments.